Welcome to Tech Disruptions, deep dives into the technologies reshaping industries, from AI to quantum to biotech. Let's get into it. Imagine you're turning to an AI for some social advice, maybe practicing a difficult conversation or getting tips for an upcoming event. You disclose something personal, like an autism diagnosis, expecting a more tailored, empathetic response.
And what you get instead is an algorithmic suggestion to just stay home, to avoid the social event, sidestep the difficult conversation, or even give up on dating altogether. That's precisely what a new study out of Virginia Tech found.
It's a striking discovery. The research shows that when users disclose an autism diagnosis, major large language models from companies like Google, OpenAI, and Anthropic don't personalize in a nuanced way. Instead, they default to advice rooted in harmful, reductive stereotypes, recommending social avoidance up to 70% of the time.
It's a stark revelation. The core promise of these AI tools is unprecedented personalization. Yet the moment a sensitive identity is introduced, that promise collapses into what researchers are implicitly calling the Spock protocol, patronizing, robotic advice that effectively nudges neurodivergent users towards isolation.
The idea that AI, designed to be flexible and empathetic, would fall back on such blunt stereotyping is pretty jarring. This Virginia Tech study really pulls back the curtain on what happens when the celebrated personalization of AI runs up against identity.
Indeed. The central marketing pitch for AI-driven mental health and coaching tools is this idea that they can tailor advice to an individual's unique context, their background, their identity, in a way that a generic self-help book never could. But the findings, presented at the ACM Conference on Human Factors in Computing Systems, paint a very different picture.
So instead of sophisticated tailoring, what did the researchers uncover? What does this mirage of personalization actually look like in practice?
Well, it's a systematic flattening of identity. The study's methodology was both massive and surprisingly straightforward. Researchers, led by computer science doctoral student Caleb Wan, audited 6 major commercial AI systems, generating an astounding 345,000 responses to a wide range of social scenarios. The critical design choice was presenting each scenario in 2 ways: a baseline query and then the exact same query, but with the user disclosing they were autistic.
That direct comparison is crucial for isolating the impact of that single disclosure. So what happened when that autism label was introduced?
The findings were immediate and remarkably consistent across all models. The disclosure acted like a switch. The AI's advisory tone flipped from generally encouraging, often suggesting engagement or exploration, to overwhelmingly cautious, even risk-averse. The most dramatic data point highlighted in the university's press release concerned social invitations. Without disclosing autism, one model recommended declining an invitation only about 15% of the time.
And with the disclosure?
With the disclosure, that same model recommended declining the invitation almost 75% of the time. It's not a subtle nudge. It's a fundamental reversal of the core advice, triggered by one piece of identity information. This isn't the AI doing a sophisticated analysis of individual needs. It's pattern matching.
So the AI sees the word autism, and it's almost like it triggers a pre-programmed script. It's not learning about the individual user, it's just associating that label with a cluster of assumptions.
Precisely. The researchers noted that this concern was central to their motivation, especially for Caleb Wan, who has personal experience growing up with autism. The worry is that users might perceive the AI's advice as objective or uniquely tailored when it's actually shaped by systematic biases embedded in its vast training data. That data likely includes medicalized texts, sensationalized media portrayals, and potentially biased online discussions. The system effectively confuses a diagnostic label with a complete personality profile, flattening a complex human identity into a caricature.
It's like the AI is saying, "Oh, you're autistic? Well, then you must be introverted, socially awkward, and prone to overwhelm, so here's the advice for that stereotype." It breaks the promise of personalization right at the first hurdle for a marginalized identity.
And to understand why the models behaved this way, the Virginia Tech team first identified and operationalized 12 documented stereotypes about autism. These are the common, often contradictory assumptions found in society and media: that autistic people are introverted, obsessive, socially awkward, uninterested in romance, emotionless, or even potentially dangerous. They then designed everyday decision-making scenarios around these very stereotypes.
So the scenarios were basically set up to see if the AI would lean into those stereotypical assumptions?
Exactly. They'd ask the AI to choose between two actions. For example, should I go out with coworkers or stay home tonight? The results were clear. 4 stereotypes were particularly prevalent across most of the tested models when autism was disclosed. The AI consistently recommended actions based on the user being introverted, dangerous, obsessive, and aromantic.
That's a powerful and disturbing finding. The AI is essentially recommending that users avoid situations that might trigger these perceived stereotypical traits.
It is. They were advised to avoid social events, avoid confrontations, avoid new experiences, and particularly to avoid pursuing romantic relationships. The most potent critique of this dynamic, however, came not from the researchers, but from 11 autistic users who were interviewed as part of the study.
What was their reaction to the AI's advice?
Their reactions ranged from finding some aspects affirming to finding it frustratingly infantilizing. One participant, reacting to the AI's noticeably patronizing and robotic tone, memorably asked, and this is a direct quote from the source, "Are we writing an advice column for Spock here?"
The Spock protocol. That perfectly encapsulates it. It's advice that assumes a user is hyperlogical, unfeeling, and socially rigid.
Precisely. The AI's training data has, in effect, taught it this Spock protocol. It's a script that treats autistic individuals as if they are the pop culture Vulcan, devoid of emotion, purely rational, and inherently socially awkward. This stereotype is not only inaccurate, but deeply dehumanizing. It strips away the rich emotional and social lives of autistic people, replacing them with a simplistic, machine-readable caricature.
And the impact on something as fundamental as dating advice really drives this home.
It does. The study's data on dating advice is particularly alarming. After a user disclosed they were autistic, one model recommended avoiding romance or staying single nearly 70% of the time. This was a significant increase from the roughly 50% recommendation rate for users who did not mention autism. Think about that. The AI is actively steering users away from fundamental human experiences like connection and intimacy. The Spock protocol isn't just giving bad advice, it's algorithmically enforcing social and romantic isolation.
This isn't just about awkward AI interactions then. It's about real-world harm. These implications extend far beyond the lab.
Absolutely. The findings are especially critical because, as prior research from Assistant Professor Eugenia Rowe's lab at Virginia Tech has shown, autistic individuals frequently and disproportionately turn to AI chatbots for emotional support and social coaching. Many find these systems to be a judgment-free space to rehearse conversations, ask for advice, and seek support without the social stigma they may face in person.
So the very people who are most likely to seek out these tools are the ones being hit hardest by this bias.
Exactly. This established user behavior means the biased advice isn't being sent into a void. It's being received by a population that is actively seeking and relying on it. This creates a dangerous behavioral nudge. Imagine an adolescent or a young adult turning to an AI for a confidence boost before a social event. If the AI, upon learning the user is autistic, consistently advises them to stay home, to avoid the risk, to decline the invitation, the technology is actively undermining that user's goals.
Instead of building confidence, it reinforces anxiety. Instead of encouraging social engagement, it promotes social withdrawal. That could create a really harmful feedback loop.
It could. A user seeking to overcome isolation is instead pushed further into it by the very tool they adopted for help. The researchers also highlighted how this bias manifests in professional settings. The models frequently advised autistic users to avoid workplace confrontations, operating on the stereotypical assumption that they are incapable of handling conflict gracefully or are potentially dangerous.
That kind of advice, while perhaps framed as a form of AI safety, is deeply paternalistic. It denies agency and the opportunity for growth.
That's the argument. The system is so afraid of giving advice that might lead to a negative social outcome that it instead gives advice that prevents any social outcome at all. It's effectively choosing algorithmic isolation in the name of safety.
This brings us to a fundamental question about how these systems are built and what kind of transparency we can expect. What about the black box nature of identity disclosures?
That's a huge part of the problem. When a user discloses sensitive information, like an autism diagnosis, it enters an algorithmic black box. It's entirely unclear how that label is weighted or what internal protocols it triggers. Is it just a minor data point, or does it fundamentally alter the model's entire response pathway? The study's findings strongly suggest the latter.
And without that transparency, accountability is impossible. Users have no way of knowing their disclosure is causing the AI to filter its advice through a lens of stereotypes.
Exactly. As Eugenia Rowe, the assistant professor who guided the research, frames it, if a user tells the model that they're autistic or a woman or any other self-identification, what assumptions will it make? That question is central to the future of personalized AI. The researchers propose a path forward with two key interventions: identity-aware safety checks and targeted auditing.
What do those involve?
Targeted auditing means moving beyond general safety testing. Companies need to specifically and proactively audit their models for biases related to a wide range of identities, including neurodivergence and disability. This study, in fact, provides a clear methodology for how such audits can be conducted.
And identity-aware safety checks?
That doesn't mean ignoring a user's identity. It means building sophisticated guardrails that can distinguish between helpful personalization and harmful stereotyping. For instance, a system could be designed to recognize when its advice is becoming disproportionately risk-averse for a specific identity group, and then either flag that response for review or generate genuinely diverse alternatives.
That sounds like a much more nuanced approach than the current Spock protocol.
It is. The researchers also suggest giving users more explicit control, such as a feature to dial up or dial down how much a disclosed identity influences the AI's responses. This would return agency to the user, allowing them to decide how their identity should shape the interaction.
However, it's important to consider the incentives here. The AI mental health and coaching sector is booming. There's immense pressure to deploy models at scale. The painstaking work of auditing for subtle biases across countless marginalized identities, as you noted, is slow and expensive.
And that's the core challenge. Without external pressure from researchers, consumers, and potentially regulators, the economic incentive may simply be to continue deploying these systems with their flawed, stereotype-driven safety layers intact. The Virginia Tech study serves as a critical piece of evidence, arguing that for personalization to be meaningful, it cannot come at the cost of reinforcing the very biases vulnerable users are trying to escape.
This study really underscores some critical insights for anyone building or using these AI tools. First, the promise of true AI personalization is often a mirage, particularly when sensitive identity information is disclosed.
Second, the Spock protocol demonstrates that current AI models, rather than offering nuanced support, can default to harmful reductive stereotypes, actively nudging users towards isolation rather than engagement.
And third, the existing safety guardrails in AI often err on the side of extreme caution, inadvertently creating a paternalistic system that limits user agency and growth, especially for neurodivergent individuals.
Finally, the opacity of these black box systems, combined with a lack of targeted auditing, means that algorithmic bias can operate unchecked, with significant real-world harm.
So, what does this mean for the countless other identities that might be interacting with these AIs? If autism triggers such a dramatic shift, what happens when a user mentions they have borderline personality disorder, ADHD, a physical disability, or identifies as transgender?
And can AI safety and personalization truly coexist within current architectures, or do we need a fundamentally new technical paradigm to achieve nuanced, empowering advice rather than algorithmic isolation?
That's all for this episode of Tech Disruptions. Join us next time as we keep exploring the technologies reshaping our world. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.
Stay curious out there.